Hey guys, Greg here with Brentwood Productions, and today this video is to answer a couple of questions about gain structure that we had. Some emails sent to us on our website, and a couple of comments on one of our videos we put out. The last set of videos I put out was a 3-part series, about 2.5 hours worth of video over Audio 101 for live sound. Go check out those videos if you haven't seen them. It's a pretty good set of videos, a lot of information in there I put out for newbies trying to get involved in live sound, or bands that are wanting to expand their knowledge based on setting up their PA equipment. And so I went over all the basic components and kind of the gear you need to get and how to hook everything together and how to set it up and do some system tuning. And so after I put that out, I had some questions about gain structure, about setting up gain on the mixer, setting up gain structure between the mixer and your crossover and your EQs and your amps and all of your extra equipment that's in there. So today we're going to go over that on how to set up the gain structure within the mixer with a microphone and a signal, and setting your system gain structure. I'm going to show you 2 different methods on how to do that. There's kind of the, I guess you could call it textbook kind of way. If you look at the manuals on your amplifiers or some of your equipment, a lot of them will tell you to do it one way. And the second way is kind of the more real-world practical situation as to what a lot of the pros do and what most venues and systems that I've ran are set up. It's a little bit different, so I'm going to show you both ways, and you can kind of go with which way works best for you and your equipment. Every piece of gear is different, and they all have different output levels and input sensitivity levels, especially if you're working with analog or digital gear. It's a completely different scale between dB full scale and where you're clipping at 0, and then in your analog world where you have a board that might go up to +10, maybe even +18 if it's a more higher end console. So there's a lot of different variances in the scales from your meters between different levels of equipment, different price ranges, and different brands. So I'm going to kind of show you some universal ways on how to do that no matter what type of gear it is, whether it's analog or digital. We'll go over both of those on kind of how to properly set up the proper gain structure. So here we go. Okay, so this will be the first way for setting system gain structure. We're going to start with the system gain structure first, and usually when you set up your rig, this is what you would set up first before you even do any of your microphone checks or anything, is you get your system all up and going and working and setting your gain structure and often your max volume as long as you want your system to go as well. So a couple instances where this method will work, and this is the maxing everything out at its clip point. So this is kind of the simpler way to do it. There's a really complicated way to go about, and if you read some of the forums online like Pro Sound Web or Sound on Sound, there's some 4 or 5 page articles in there on setting up gain structure, and it's a lot about taking every piece of equipment you have and reading the specs on it and figuring out what the output level of that piece of equipment is and every single part of your signal chain, and then being able to take those to, okay, I need to attenuate minus 3 dB on this item, and I need to boost 3 dB on this, I need to add a pad on this. So it's a lot of complicated reading and setup you have to do, and let's face it, most of you guys out there, if you're a band setting up your PA, or if you're a more novice amateur sound guy and you're not that experienced with all the electronic side of the things or the a lot of the pro audio terms, that would take you a long time to try to figure out how to do. So I'm going to show you a little bit more simpler method, and basically what that is doing is that it's getting every piece of gear at its highest input and output levels to max out each piece of equipment. So theoretically they should all kind of clip at the same time if it does go into clipping, so you're maxing out every piece of gear. And so a lot of ways that can be done. Usually here with Pink Noise, so we're going to have our Audio Tools app. I always promote this app and most of my videos I show. This is an awesome tool to get if you have an iPhone or an iPad. It's not available for Droid, but there are some other generators and stuff you can get, different audio tools you can get for Droid stuff. But if you have an iPhone or iApp, it's called Audio Tools. It's $19.95. It's the best $20 you ever spend for doing any sort of PA stuff. So we're going to have our sound generator, and it's on Pink Noise. Turn our output on, And so now we're sending pink noise into the board. And so pink noise is good to check to max out your system because it's going to be 20 hertz to 20K. So everything is in there as a solid source that you're going to get. Realistically, you're not going to get music that's that well balanced all the way across. So this is showing the max amount of input and output signal you could get is using pink noise. So what we'll do, we'll go down here. And we'll pan our light down a little bit better so you can see the board without too much of a glare. It's hard to do in the garage here, but you should get the gist of it. So you see I have it coming in on a stereo channel. Here's our simple Barshow Behringer board. So what a lot of people might be working with, stuff like this. Maybe you have a Mackie, you know, whatever. If you have a digital board, it's even better to work with for small format stuff. But I'm just showing you the basics. Use whatever you have available to you. It's all pretty much going to be the same. So analog world, and it's hard to see this scale here, but this one goes up to, you have 0 here, 2, 4, 7, and plus 10, and then clip. So determining by the rest of these, clip of this is probably about plus 13, maybe plus 12 on this console, on this little mixer here. A bigger board, like a more pro board, like the board I work on at work, the Venue SC48 is a $25,000 console. It's digital, but it reads the analog input instead of the digital input. Some of the stuff like the Yamaha or the new Behringer X32, which I got to play with today, actually is a pretty awesome board. I would definitely buy that if you can afford the $3 for it. The best bang for your buck you'll get. We're actually doing a write-up for Behringer on that, if we can get marketing approval for us to do that and everything like that. So that's beside the point. But if you are running a digital board, you're going to clip at 0. But as I was saying, some analog consoles, like both I have at work, the Soundcraft MH4 and the Venue SC48, which is digital but reads this input, will go up to plus 18. Is the highest I've ever seen on a mixer. So you have plus 10 on this guy. It'll go up to plus 18 on its input. So they have a lot more headroom, but it's a lot higher in console. So each one is going to be different. You know, most of the small format mixers I've seen like this, or like the Mackies or the Yamaha MG24, MG32, most of them is probably going to be around this range. Plus 10, plus 12 is kind of the max of what they go. So starting with our input signal, our pink noise is coming in. And on a stereo channel, or if you have a gain, so you don't want to burn up, you know, a microphone input, you know, for stuff like this. You could do this with your music playback as well. So a lot of them, for music playback and stuff, here's another way to do this, is you have like plus 4 or minus 10 on this console. Sometimes there's a pad. So you have negative 10, and see how lower the levels is here. And you're only hitting about negative 4, not even hitting unity. Or you have plus 4, and now we're peaking up about plus 7. So that's pretty hot coming in. So that's about as hot as you can get it. My output is turned all the way up on the iPad, so that's as hot as the signal coming in is going to get. And that's almost peaking the entire channel strip. You know, it can't go much further than that. So it's almost hitting the negative 10, or the plus 10 over here. So that's the max signal coming in. And then, so secondly, we're going to pop it onto the mains. So now we're looking at the main bus on our Solo over here. And we have our channel here coming in. It's unmuted, and we're going to bring it up, and we're just going to max out the channel. So this is the first method some books will tell you, or some pieces of equipment will tell you, is to max out your board to where you're, you know, slamming it just below clips or hitting plus 10 there. It won't go any louder than that. The fader's all the way up. But if you had multiple channels, obviously doing this, you would be clipping your mixer right now. So they suggest that you start all the way up when your mixer maxed out like that. So if you look over here, the next stage is coming into the 31 band, coming out of the mixer. And you can see it is hitting, if you can read the numbers there, it's a little hard to see. But this is plus 12 here, and then clip. So you can see the differences in what they're talking about and how there's different output levels. So this mixer says it's hitting plus 10 coming out, but you see over here it's plus 12. So there's a couple dB variants in there, and even though it's both Behringer gear, a Behringer EQ and a Behringer board, there's just a little bit of differences in preamps a lot of times, and their outputs and inputs of equipment on what they have. So there's 2 or 3 dB difference on the outputs here of what this one actually says it's outputting, and same here. So once again, this is just maxing everything out, so you can see it's just below clipping. So the loudest it would get is at that point there. And then finally we'll go to our rack. And you see over here, get out of the light there, and you have input at 0, and you can see my limiter is starting to come in on the high output and kind of the low output, which just tells me that the way the system is tuned now, and just from the differences in how the gear sounds, that the high output is actually a little hotter than what the low is, just coming through the 31 band. So that you can do this even without your speakers hooked up, so you can hear there's nothing coming through right now because it would be blaring over the mic. So you can check your gain structure while you're doing your setup before you're even allowed to make noise during your show. You can do this beforehand, and you can just check the maximum limits of everything your gear is going to hit. So what I can do over here is I can roll my limiter off just slightly to where I'm not clipping there, and I'll back it up just a little bit to where I'm actually hitting my limit. So technically on this, my input isn't actually clipping. This is the limiter. It's a multi-band limiter on the outputs of the high and the low. And so that is going to sense when there's too much signal coming out of that output, it limits it. And this is to protect the next stage of your gear, which is your amplifiers, which is the worst thing you want to clip because that is how you blow speakers. So you want to set that to where you're at that max level coming out. You roll that back just a little bit, and you know that it's just barely going to catch it. So if it gets louder than that, it's going to start limiting. The last phase is to turn up the amplifiers. So this is the first method. What a lot of the equipment will tell you is start with your amplifiers all the way off, and then you roll them up just to where you start to see your clip light flash on, and then back it off, and you should be good there. So you can match that on these. You can tell these are both Crown amps here, Crown 602, Crown 802. I can bring my sub amp up a little higher before it even clips. And that just has to do with the differences in the years of manufacture and the input structure of the amplifier. So you can see down here, these are turned up about 1 o'clock, and these are turned back to about 11 o'clock to get the same level input without clipping. So theoretically here, your amps would never clip. You have that protection limiter on your crossover that would keep it from clipping. So that's this guy all the way over here. That's a little hard to read, but multi-band limiter, so you have that. So this is a second protection to keep it from clipping your amp. So it'll clip here on the outputs of your high and low before it ever clips your amp. And so that's your maximum setting there. That's as loud as it's going to get. And secondly, the amps will also tell you, maybe just not clipping, you just turn your amps up as loud as you need your playback volume to be. So a common misconception, this is not a volume knob. This is the input sensitivity. So amplifiers will put out their constant power basically measured at 0. And that is going to be your RMS power. And then of course when they go higher, you hit your peak output is when you have those spikes. So what this is changing is actually kind of where that 0 point is. So when it's all the way open, it just means the littlest amount of signal getting to it is going to make your amp hit its constant max RMS output. And then of course you're going to have peaks from there. So what this is doing is adjusting the input control. In some amplifiers, it's easier to tell. You'll actually have an input meter. So on these Crowns, I just have a signal light that flashes, and on the 602, I don't even have an incoming signal light because it's a little bit older model. Some of your newer amps or different brands actually will have an input that might go from like -12, -6, and then 0, and then they'll have a clip after that. So you want to run those at 0 if you're wanting that max volume as soon as possible. You want to be hitting that when you're maxing out your pink noise like that. So the recap on that: max out the mixer, max out your EQ, roll back your limiter to where it barely starts to clip, and then bring your amps up to their clipping or as loud as you need them. So that's the first method of kind of how a lot of the manuals will tell you how to do it. This works good if you are a DJ and you're mainly providing just constant playback volume that's already, or playback music that's already mastered. It's pretty much going to stay at the same volume. Yes, there are dynamics, but it's a mastered, compressed, limited set of music. If you're DJing, that works good for that, because you know the system is maxed out with that pink noise. Your music is going to have a little bit more dynamics in the pink noise, so you're never going to clip your system. But if you're doing with live bands, this is the way most of the systems that I've worked on with Pro Gear is set up a little different, and I'm going to show you that second method. And they go from the zero approach or unity approach. And the reason is because you get a little bit more balance in your system. And I'll show you what happens. So we go all the way back to our mixer structure here. So right now we are maxing out our mixer. You know, we're hitting plus 12 over here. And that was cranking up, you know, the fader as loud as it goes and peaking here. Problem is that in mixing live music, there's a lot more dynamics. There's a lot more incoming signals. It's not a fully mastered and limited album. So you're going to have a lot more differences in volume. So what most pros do is they mix everything pretty much around unity. And we'll get into this in the gain structure of the mic real quick after I show you the system. So we'll do the same thing with pink noise. But what we're going to do is use it at a more usable level. So even when mixing, I have a 48 channel console at work. And some of the shows, we'll get bigger bands that will actually take up 30 channels of instruments and microphones, vocal mics and everything coming in. And I will still only be hitting plus 4, plus 6 on my console at work with 30 inputs. So hitting plus 10 on a mixer, I've never even seen happen. And usually you're going to clip all of your outboard gear, your system processing and stuff before you'd ever get that loud. You know, on your outputs and things like that, even if you turn them down, because it's not a practical output level. Even running like, you know, some of the loudest bands I've seen, like Deftones and things like that, when I've worked, I set up system tech for those when they come to our venue and look at their engineers boards and what they're doing, as loud as they're running, they're maxing out the max volume of that, hitting, you know, 112 dB at front of house, which is cranking loud because you're going to be louder than that on the front of the stage, and they're still not hitting plus 10 coming out of a mixer. So more usable level is they're going to keep the same incoming level. So we're still coming in at plus 4 on our signal. Pop it back to our main bus. So now you see we're kind of peaking about 0, averaging, and then we're peaking into about -2. I have my fader here at 0. If we look over here on my structure, you go over here, and well, look at that. So I'm at 0 there, and I'm actually coming in at 0. You can kind of tell. Again, I said the focus a little off. There we go. It's a little better. So you have 0 coming in, and we're kind of peaking at plus 3. So we're constantly coming in at 0 at unity. You notice I'm at unity here on my inputs. I didn't crank these all the way up. I've seen this done before too, where everyone just maxes out everything. Of course, that's clipping there. But they like to crank out all this. Most pro systems, the Clark Technic processors we have at my work, and a lot of the other processors I've seen, their inputs are all set to 0. It's about a $4,000 processor. If you get a drive rack system that's outputting different high, mid, low, sub outputs and things like that, most of those are all set as 0 as well. Our system at work is set the same way. Inputs are at 0, and the max output, it's a digital output on that because it's a digital system processor. Clips at 0, the limiter is set at 0. So if it does clip, it'll actually compress and not allow any more signal to come through. So everything is set to unity. So what you can do with your amps now, set to unity there. You notice here, the same levels, I'm not clipping at all on any of my outputs. And what I can do is go down to my amps, and I can crank these all the way open. So these input sensitivities are all the way up. And some amplifiers, depending on the brand, will actually have a 0 on the amplifier. And all the amps that we have at my work are EVP3000s. I don't even know how many offhand there are rack wise, but there's about 65,000 watts. All of them are set to 0. And on this one, I don't know if you can kind of barely see, there's a little bit of flicker on the right channel. For some reason, this amplifier, the right channel is slightly hotter, but I bought it used, so I could deal with that by just backing this off a couple of clicks, and it goes away.
So there you go, my amps are turned up all the way on their input sensitivity, and so what this is going to do is give me the most amount of dynamic range and headroom possible. When I send a signal in, it's not just hitting that limit I had before where you're just maxing out the pink noise out of the mixer. Now I have a lot more room coming into it. So I'm at 0 on my input here, and so when you're mixing music that's a lot more dynamic, I can get those volumes out of my PA system without having to have a super high output limited mixer output. So I can mix everything at unity pretty much, and I get the most volume out of my system. So the other way, you're maxing out your mixer, maxing out all of your processing, and then you're just turning your amp up until it clips and roll it back. This way I can run the amp wide open, and I know as long as I don't clip out front and I go a little bit further, I'm not going to clip my amplifier. And so I'll show you kind of a way to monitor that. So if you have a main system processing, like a drive rack, or you're using a system processor, and what most pro engineers do is they mix off of that. Their amps are opened all the time. All the pro venues I've seen, the gear I've worked on, the amps are opened up all the way like this. And what they're doing is they'll watch on their system processing. So you usually have your system processors in your front of house rack, and you'll be watching your high outputs and your low outputs and your sub outputs and watch for those to clip, and you'll mix off of that. So if you mix everything at unity, which is what most guys do, mix pretty much around unity, and we'll talk about that in a second. You get your mix dialed in, you get a relatively flat mix to where it's not too high, not too much bass. You kind of get your system processors maxing out, and if those don't clip, your amp won't clip. So here I don't have a system processor, but I can kind of monitor my amps, and you just learn your equipment. So it's always best if you can set your amplifiers up in your room, or the bar, or whatever you're working in, to where you can see those limiter meters so you can tell what your system is doing. But if that's not always the case, the best is just learn where your system output's at. So what I do is I know I was fine there with everything at unity, and I'm peaking +3 here. So I can take a look up, and I'll look out to my amps, see if you guys can see this here at all. Try to get the camera as focused as possible, but it's kind of crappy. But what we'll do, see, okay, I'm clipping there, and I can see over here I'm at +6. And so what I can do is I'll just slightly roll back the limiter on the rack a little more, so that'll catch it a little before. So these will actually catch now about that +6 coming out of the EQ, or into the EQ, that's the input meter. So that'll start clipping there, and then this one will catch first, and you can tell there's still a little bit of clipping on the amp just because the Behringer limiter isn't the greatest, but it gets the job done. It's just an extra level of protection. So what I can do is I go back to my system. You can see my mixer is outputting at about +4 with the pink noise. Remember, this is still coming out of pink noise, so this is 20 to 20 all the time right now. So I can just slightly back that off, and so I know when I watch my system, and I know if I'm hitting anything above +3 here, that I'm good. Once I get up to +6, I'll be hitting my system max. So I can just monitor this my entire show with my whole mix with the band behind it, and I know I'm not going to clip my amplifiers as long as I'm not peaking above that. You can also learn the gain structure on the mixer as well, and just know, okay, I'm good at 0 here, and I can hit, +2, almost occasionally +4, and I'll clip a little bit. So you just manage your volume around that. So this is my preferred method to do it. This is how most of the pros do it that I've ever worked with, and what I've seen is they all do it by their front of house processing, because you can't see your amplifiers. They're on the stage or behind the stage, under the stage, in racks, and so all the system limiting is done out front. They're usually opened up all the way, and they set their limiters on their processing to max out. So what you can do, if you have like a drive rack system, you can set a limiter at that incoming level, or pop in your output mode, which on this one is here. So you can see my output after you've done your 31 band adjustments. You're going to lose a little bit of gain because you're cutting out some frequencies. So you can see I'm actually coming out at about 0. So I'm outputting 0 out of my 31 band. And that's obviously just showing me the left and the right signal. So if you have a drive rack system or anything like that with some sort of system processing, you can set those limiter outputs on your processor to where you can have your amps opened up all the way, and then you know you're going to max out at those points of your highs and your mids or lows, however many amps you have for your system, if you have a biamp or a triamp or a 4-way system or whatever. So that's pretty much the way I've always seen it done in the pro world. This is the way I prefer to mix. I just run the amps all the way open, and then back them off a little bit if I need to. The biggest problem, and this is what I see people doing, is the reason their amps clip is because they're underpowering their speakers. So I know when my system is cranked open that loud to begin with, when I'm mixing at Unity on my outputs, which is always the best place to run, is at 0 here, is that you're trying to get more volume than what your system can handle. So if you find that you're having to turn your speakers up that much and you're clipping your amplifiers without it being overbearingly loud, that means you need to buy a more powerful amplifier. You need a bigger system. You have maxed out your system at that point. You should be able to run your PA system to where it gets to an uncomfortable loudness level that you have to back it down before your amplifiers clip, especially when mixing live bands. So like most of your main big arena PAs and pro concert venues like I have at work, when you're maxing out that system, it's pretty dang loud. Like I've talked about some of my other videos, if you watch them, 114 dB SPL is where it starts damaging human hearing. So most concerts, the front of house position will usually reach about 112. It's kind of a safe operating level because as you get closer to the stage, it will be louder. That's why I always tell people, wear earplugs if you're those guys in the front row. If you're in front of the front of house position, I suggest you wear earplugs. Anywhere around the front of house, you're usually good, because most of the time the front of house engineer won't be wearing earplugs unless he's got some really high fidelity ones that allow him to mix while still being able to hear the higher frequencies, which some guys do. But 112 is pretty loud if you're exposed to it all the time, but occasionally, you know, that's what you're going to run into in the concert world. So your PA system should be able to reach those high levels, and you'll have to back it down on your faders without clipping your amplifier. So if you find yourself constantly clipping, even though you try to reset all your gain structure, I would suggest buy a bigger system, get bigger speakers that produce more sound. So even if it's the same wattage, try a dual 15 or a dual 12 if you only have a single. More speakers pushing that same watts produces more air movement, so you can get a little bit more volume by adding a dual rather than a single, because there's more speakers pushing that air movement. So the more air you push, the louder it is. It's kind of how sound works. So with that, that's the system tuning, and real quick we'll show you the microphone. So we're going to pull that out completely. That's that pink noise. And so this is the other used thing, is or kind of the mix done item, is your mixer gain structure as opposed to your incoming microphone. So I see this done incorrectly a lot, and where people have problems with getting a balanced mix, it's all starting with the gain. So obviously everyone knows you turn up gain too much and you're going to get all sorts of crazy feedback. And so I showed some system tuning before on how to kind of balance those out. So you can watch my live sound videos for that on the system tuning. So we're just going to show you how to set the gain structure here. So the best way is to, we'll start with our gain all the way off. We're going to solo that channel. So we're soloed there. We're going to PFL. And solo that guy. Okay. So you have a microphone coming in. And when you check these, one of the things I see done the most is people don't have enough signal on their incoming microphone. So it's always best, rather, no matter what the instrument is, you know, mic placement first. Get the hottest spot of the instrument, the best sounding spot of the instrument. The most volume into your input, the less you have to turn up your preamp, the better. It's better to start with the best and the most sound from the stage, especially with vocals. If the vocalist can give you more power coming in, that's what you want. And then you're going to not have to turn up your gain as much. So when you have a vocalist coming in and you start checking your mic, check, check, 1, 2, check, check. check, check, 1, 2, check, 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 1, 2, check, check, 1, 2, check, check, 1, 2. So you see there, I'm up in the yellow. You want to get your gain up enough to where you're peaking above 0. You kind of want to always be hitting 0. It's kind of a general workaround to start with. And peaking, I like to, with this console, or this little mixer, I usually get it up, my vocals around +4 to +7, and the way decibels work is in the actual voltage measured scale. 6 dB is a doubling in loudness. So if a vocalist gets twice as loud as what they're coming in, at that +4 to +7, I'm still good without clipping that channel because I can go all the way to +10. As I said, this one will clip probably around +12, +13. So I have 6 dB of headroom in there before I actually clip my max channel. So I know I'm good at that coming in. And so with your incoming signals, you want to get the most amount of usable signal possible. So you see this a lot, especially like in recording, is you want to get the best levels, because the best incoming levels, then the less fader noise you have, and you get a better signal chain. So if you have a bunch of really weak levels, and you'll see this a lot in recording, you're having to turn up your faders and boost everything else, you get a lot more noise. The more signal coming in, the cleaner it can sound, obviously without clipping, because you're sending that channel more voltage. The less the mic pre has to turn up, or your trim, some boards call it a trim, your gain. The less you have to turn that up, the less noise you're adding to your signal. Even on high-end consoles, even on a $25,000, $100,000 console, if you're having to crank your gain up to +30, +40 on the incoming signal, you're going to start hearing hiss. So even though, you know, yes, this is a cheaper Behringer board, this is one of the older ones, so it's not as good, but it works for simple little bar shows. Their quality of their gear has gotten a lot better with their newer stuff. So obviously, you know, with lower quality gear, you have a little bit less room to turn up that gain before you start getting attributes and noise coming out of your preamp. So the more incoming signal you can max out, the better. So get that vocalist to, you know, project as much as they can. Keep a nice solid level to where they're obviously not going to blow out their voice, but get a good solid incoming signal where you don't have to crank that gain way up. So you get good signals there, and then you're set for the preamp stage. Now when you get down to your fader, another thing I hate seeing is when people have all their faders something like this. They're all way down here. And so this one, most analog mixers, and even in the digital also, when you come all the way out, you know, they'll come down to -infinity, which is all the way off. It's not letting any signal come through the signal chain at all. And then sometimes they'll max that at +10. Some faders will go up to +12. So every mixer is going to have what's called the unity gain, and that is what the 0 line is. So every mixer, and even in your software, if you're doing recording stuff, and it's going to be the same thing, you're going to have a unity gain line. Unity gain means you're neither adding to or subtracting from the voltage for that channel. So whatever's coming in at that preamp, the fader is just allowing that to pass all the way through to your output bus or wherever else it's going, maybe a group, maybe a matrix, to whatever bus you're sending to. So unity gain is passing that signal through. Mixer faders operate best and most precisely around unity gain. This is why all your pros mix pretty much around unity. If you go to a pro concert and you look at their console, most of their faders are pretty close to 0. With the exception of maybe a couple of items that come through a lot hotter, such as overheads, maybe hi-hat you'll see pulled down more because those signals come through so hot that that's the way they mix around, they pull them back. Other guys I've seen leave most of theirs pretty much around unity, and they'll back it off on their gain a little. So if they want their hi-hat fader closer to unity, they'll just back it off on their gain because that signal comes through so hot that it cuts through the mix anyway, and they might not need as much incoming level over here. So it's kind of the hierarchy of structure of how you want your mix to go. Kick and snare you might want super hot because you want those to come through. They're kind of all on their own. Vocals you want to stand out. You want those coming in louder. Maybe guitars and cymbals you could bring in a little bit lesser level. Maybe keep those around 0 instead of that +4. So you can keep your faders around unity, obviously, because you know they're gonna cymbals and guitar is going to cover up your vocals. They're in the same frequency range as the human voice. Kick and snare, bass guitar, they're kind of on their own, and they're different sounds completely, so they don't really drown out your vocals. So you can have those, it's where you get a nice low end punch and that smack of your percussion coming through. So the reason faders work best around 0 is it has to deal with the way the whole structure of a fader is built. So if you look at any mixer, and I'll try to show you on this one, but look at your gear, you see on the lower scales here, they have infinity, -60, -40, -30, 25, 20, 15, 10, and then they jump up to 0, and then they only go up to plus 10 on this one. And so you see, as I said, you're doubling in volume with 6 dB. So a 3 dB difference is a slight change in your mix. So if you want your vocals slightly louder, you want your kick drum slightly louder, 3 dB is a slight difference in volume. So when you're mixing, you think, oh, I need to hear that guitar just a little bit louder. So you have 3 dB slightly louder. So you have room to push that fader 3 dB. So going back here to the scale, you can see how within less than like the width of a pen, so maybe an 1/8 of an inch difference is jumping in 20 dB. So 60 to 40, here's a 10 dB jump, 40 to 30. 25 to 20, and you get a wider range as you go up. So you see, the closer you get to 0, you can move slight differences, 1/4 of an inch, and you're only adjusting a few dB. If you're mixing with your faders all the way down here, I'm here at 25, I move it slightly, oh, now I just jump 5 dB. Or even worse, all the way down here, you can jump 10 dB and 1/4 of an inch. So you should never mix with your faders all the way down here. Your gain structure should be set up to where you can mix around unity. So that way, when I have it at unity, my guitar, or maybe it's a vocal, whatever, is okay, I need to pull that back slightly. You can just slightly pull that back, and I'm still within the little unity box here. So you see most of these will have kind of a box in area. Sometimes mixers have a little crosshatch area, so you can kind of stay on this range here unless you really need something to stand out. So maybe vocal, you can have most of your other stuff pretty close around unity, and then sometimes your vocal, maybe if they're a quiet singer or a softer part of a song or something, maybe you need to push it up to +3, maybe even +6. And so when I did my feedback check in my other video that I showed how to do this, I was actually able to get my fader all the way up here to around +8 with the same gain structure that I set in this video, where I was hitting around here around +2 to +4 coming in, and I was able to tune out my system with my 31 band to where I could have my vocal coming in here with that gain, ride my fader all the way up there without feeding back. So that's kind of how it all ties together with proper gain structure and system tuning. Is you run most of your mics around that 0 point, you have a little room to press them up, you're not clipping, you're not feeding back. That you're on the roll to a properly mixed show from that point there. So some of the worst sounding systems a lot of times is just because they don't have proper gain structure. When a lot of things you can't hear them or they're muffled, it's because the gain structure is not set right. I've seen this even in the pro world of touring engineers coming in. I don't even remember the band now, but they had an engineer come in. There's a lot of guys that just get on the road. They aren't pro-trained sound guys. They're not professionally trained or anything. They're just they got thrown on a tour because they knew somebody, and I want to run our sound. Okay. And I had a guy come in, and he, for some reason, thought he had to have all of his incoming levels at 0 completely. Everything at unity on the input, and all of his faders at unity. He had no compression on any of his channels, not on his vocals, no gates on anything. He had everything coming in at 0, and all of his faders were literally just set straight to 0 just like this. Everything was zero coming in, and his vocal was a little loud, and it sounded like just a big muddy mess jumble. You know, open a Pro Tools session and try that. If you have some tracks in Pro Tools or any other DAW, they usually default to all the faders at 0. See what that sounds like. I've seen people actually mix live like that, and it sounds horrible. I don't know where they learned to do that, so don't do that. It's not the proper way, you know, to mix. So just leaving everything directly flat at 0 is not exactly what you want. So as I said, yes, you can mix around Unity, but you need to make those slight adjustments and, you know, to get your mix in to where everything will be slightly balanced and fits well together, parks well in the mix. A lot is also done with the EQ and parking that in there, but that's a whole nother separate thing. We're just doing gain structure today. So just with the gain of getting good incoming levels on the instruments that can stand out, some of your brighter things like hi-hat and cymbals, overheads, you can maybe use slightly less input on those because they are a hotter signal. They will cut through your mix just because of the frequency range that they're in. But getting proper gain structure, like I said, mix around that 0 point. It doesn't have to be everything set directly at Unity. That's not, you know, the correct way. So maybe he was told at one point, oh, mix at Unity, and he just leaves everything flat at 0. That's not really it, so don't get confused on that. Yes, mix around Unity, but it does not mean your fader sits there at 0 the entire time for your whole show, because it will just sound like a big muddied mess. And of course you have to mix. That's the art of mixing. You don't just set it and forget it for the whole show. The entire time throughout the song, all that is making slight little changes. You do the same thing in recording. When you track stuff in the studio and they go through and they do the mix down, it just doesn't sit there the entire time. They go through hours of mix automation and making slight 1 to 2, 3 dB adjustments the entire time in your software, and they automate all that to where the software is just automatically going to do it, and they'll go back and play the same, you know, same 4 bars or same measures over and over again until they get the exact structure there. Then they go to the next part of the song and they'll mix that, you know, differently. So it's always slight changes that you need to be making to keep that mix going. A lot of times your drums and your backline can kind of stay roughly the same, and maybe you just ride your vocals a lot. Compression and stuff like that will help you manage keeping those levels on your very percussive sounds or very dynamic sounds like bass guitar, kick, and snare. I won't go over compression in this video, but I'm going to do a screenshot video with Pro Tools. I did one on gating in the same method. I am going to do a compression video on properly using compression, and we'll talk about different techniques and stuff like that in that video, on some different ways you can use compression and achieve different sounds with different input settings and things like that. So we'll go over that in the compression video, so look for that on the Brincer Productions page. But from here, this is pretty much everything for gain structure. This video is quite lengthy. I know I said it was going to be short, but I ended up wanting to talk a lot more about proper things here than what I originally planned on. And from the rest of my videos, if you're still watching this one, all of my videos are pretty much this way. I give you the most amount of detail possible, and a lot of that is from my background. I went to college for audio, so there's some things I took away from that on especially explaining audio and teaching it, which is why I try to explain a lot more detail, go a lot more in depth for you guys out there willing to sit around and watch a half-hour video. I hope you learned a lot. I hope you have a lot more understanding of it. I try to show a lot more than these little 5, 6 minute, 7 minute videos on YouTube do on how to do things, just because I know there's a lot of people out there with questions. We have quite a few subscribers on our page. A few of our videos, they don't get as many hits as some of the other ones yet, and we're trying to get better hits out there so we get some more people checking out our videos. But I think we have about 75 to 100 subscribers on our page, which I guess is pretty good for people that we don't even know. They've just seen all these videos that we put out, and they like the information we're putting out there. So I know that there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially in the blog form and the websites and YouTube videos and stuff like that. There's a lot of guys that, you know, they just kind of do some audio on the side and they try to teach it. Me and my brother, production is our full-time job. That is our yearly income. That pays for my house, my car, my kids. It's pretty good money. We do this full-time in a pro venue every single day, 5 or 6 bands a week sometimes. A lot of that's in one day with a festival show. We mix hundreds of bands a year. My brother does lighting. I get big name shows all the time coming up. After this video is put out, here in the next month. I'm going to be having Motorhead come through our venue. We're going to be having Garbage come through our venue, David Allan Coe, the comedian Stephen Lynch. Coming up in 2 days, we have country singer Gary Allan. So there's some big names coming through our venue that we get to work with and work with their engineers. So for any of you doubting that I don't know what I'm talking about, trust me, this is the best way to go about it. If you have questions about anything I explained or you need more detail, send us an email. We try to put out videos whenever we can, whenever I get a chance to. My schedule, it's a little hard to do. So we try to get those out whenever I can. This video was a result of that, somebody asking about it. So hopefully you guys learned something, and check out the rest of our videos on our page. For how-to videos, project ideas, and tricks of the trade, check out the Brinster Productions channel on YouTube. Real production advice from working professionals in the sound and lighting industry.